Today I'm going to cover solving quadratic equations by factoring. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking these quadratic equations, we're going to factor them, and we're going to solve to get the values of x, which actually shows us where these graphs will cross the x-axis. So the first couple problems we're going to start by solving using the greatest common factor. All right, so out of these two terms, I can factor out a 3x. That leaves me with 3x plus 1. Now this is all still equal to 0. Now this is different from what we were talking about before when we were just factoring because we didn't have that equals 0. Now we do. So all we're going to do from here is we're going to take each of these pieces. So I have the 3x here and the 3x plus 1. And we're going to set each of those equal to 0 and solve. So I have 3x equals 0, and then I have 3x plus 1 equals 0. I'm going to divide both sides by 3. X equals 0, so we cross the x-axis at 0, the origin. And then we also cross the x-axis at -1/3. So those are our two zeros, two places where we cross the x-axis. All right, we're going to do the same thing on this next problem. We're going to factor using the greatest common factor first, and then we're going to set both pieces equal to 0. So I'm going to factor to 5x, leaving me with x minus 4 equals 0. So I have 5x equals 0. X minus 4 equals 0. So I'm going to divide both sides by 5. So I get x equals 0. And then I'm going to add my 4. Get x equals 4. So for this quadratic, we cross the x-axis at both 0 and 4. All right, now we're going to look at solving, we have a trinomial here, and we also are going to have a difference of squares. All right, so remember when we're solving these trinomials, we're looking for two numbers that add to -6 and multiply to 9. Now, since we multiply to a positive and add up to a negative, I know we're going to be talking about two negative numbers here. All right, and that'd be x minus 3 and x minus 3. Now we're going to set both of those equal to 0. And what you'll probably see is that we have the same thing on both sides. So we have x equals 3 here, and x equals 3 here. Now what that means, if they're exactly the same, that just means that we only have one place that we cross the x-axis, and that's going to be our vertex. Because if we're only crossing at one point, we know the only possible way that that can happen is if we have that the x-intercept being a vertex. So 1, 2, 3, so it would be something like that. And now we also know since our function has a positive a, that means our parabola is opening upward. So it gives you an idea of what's going on with our graph. All right, here, see how we have equals 36 on the right? We need to make sure we move everything over so it's equals 0, like all the other problems we've talked about. So we're going to subtract 36 from both sides. I have x squared minus 36 equals 0. Now we have a difference of squares. So remember, this is when we talked about the a and the b, and we're going to use the formula a plus b times a minus b. All right, so our a in this case is x. So think about like taking the square root of the first term. That'll give you your a. And b, you're going to take the square root of that second term. That'll give you 6. So we just plug it into the formula. So I have x plus 6 and x minus 6 equal to 0. So x plus 6 equals 0, and x minus 6 equals 0. So I'm going to subtract 6 here. I get x equals -6. I'm going to add 6 here. x equals positive 6. All right, so those are my two zeros of this function. All right. So if we look at the next page, we again have two trinomials. Now this first one, we still have a equaling 1. So we are going to do the same thing, add up to -2, multiply to -15. Now I know in this case, we're going to have both a positive and a negative number. Now since we multiplied to a negative, that's how I know we have two different signs, but we're adding up to a negative number. So that means that our bigger number is going to go with the negative. So I'm going to have x plus 3 and x minus 5. Now, if you can't remember how to do this factoring, you need to look back at the factoring lessons we did last week, because you won't be able to completely solve these problems until you understand how to do the factoring. All right, I'm going to do the same thing. And so I know x is going to equal -3 here. And I have x minus 5 equals 0, so x will equal 5. All right, now this last one, we have a is a positive 5. So if that's the case, we're going to need to solve using a slightly longer process to factor this quadratic. So remember, when we set up this problem, we're going to look at a times c, and our b is going to be on the bottom here. So I'm going to start by filling in my parentheses here. All right, my a term goes here, my c term goes here, and the two factors that we end up getting will go here and here. All right, so a times c in this case is going to give us 120. So we're looking for a number two numbers that multiply to 120, so a times c, and they add up to our b term, which is 34. All right, now those two numbers are going to be 30 and 4. And remember, those are going to have the x with them. So I'm going to plug these into our two factors that we have going. So I have 5x squared plus 30x and 4x plus 24. So now we're going to take the greatest common factor out of each set of parentheses. So I get 5x, so that will give me x plus 6. And then 4x plus 24, I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor, which is 4. That'll leave me with x plus 6. All right, now what you should see is that these two sets of parentheses look the same. That's perfect. That's part of our answer. It's one of our factors. All right, and the other is going to come from this 5x plus 4. All right, so now we have our two factors that we're now going to set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract my 4. So I have 5x equals -4. Divide by 5. X equals -4/5, and it's okay to leave it as a fraction. And then subtract my 6 over here. X equals -6. So this would mean that my parabola would cross the x-axis at -4/5 and -6. Now, if we have a problem that looks like this, let's say we have 2x squared equals -x plus 1. Remember, before we can do any factoring, we need to get everything over to one side together. Now, just for the ease of everything being in the same format as the problems I just showed you, I'm going to move everything over to the left side. So I'm going to add my x, and that'll give me 2x squared plus x equals 1, and then subtract my 1. So 2x squared plus x minus 1 equals 0. Now remember, we can't combine any of these terms here because they are not like terms. So that's how we end up with this quadratic. All right, from here, then you'd be able to factor, set each of your factors equal to 0, and solve to get those x values.